The Pacific War ended in August 1945, a sudden silence punctuated only by the lingering echoes of two devastating bombs. Across Japan, surrender was a whispered word, heavy with humiliation and grief. For women in uniform, captivity followed swiftly. On August 20th, nearly 300 Japanese female prisoners were transported from Guam to the American mainland. Among them was Yumiko Ai, a 24-year-old nurse from Nagasaki, a survivor of the war's final weeks. She carried little more than a notebook and worn gloves, remnants of years of rationing. The ship's deck reeked of oil, salt, and unfamiliar tobacco. American guards, many barely older than the prisoners, moved with a casual confidence that felt alien to Yumiko. Their clean uniforms, polished boots, and imposing physiques contrasted sharply with everything she knew. She remembered her instructor's warnings. American men were weak, lazy, spoiled by capitalist excess. But the guard who offered her water that morning, his tanned arms steady as iron, was anything but weak. Beside her, Kiko Sato, a wiry 20-year-old radio operator from Okinawa, whispered in disbelief, "Were we lied to all this time?" The 10-day voyage to California chipped away at the carefully constructed propaganda that had shaped their worldviews. Meals were astonishingly abundant. Cans of fruit, white bread, real coffee, luxuries unimaginable in war-torn Japan. Some women ate timidly, suspicious of a trick. Others wept openly at the sight of sugar, butter, and meat portions far exceeding anything they'd ever known. When the transport docked in San Francisco, the city unfolded before them in a misty haze. Skyscrapers of steel and glass, bridges arching across the bay, the ceaseless hum of traffic. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen, far exceeding the distorted wartime photographs they had studied. To Kiko, it seemed like the future itself. Their journey continued inland by train, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a counterpoint to the vast landscapes they traversed. Rolling fields of wheat, orchards laden with fruit, herds of cattle grazing peacefully. A panorama that mocked everything they'd been taught about a starving, crumbling America. Hai Nishida, a 19-year-old medical student conscripted late in the war, scribbled in her journal, "If this is the land of a dying race, then the world must be upside down. Even the children at the stations look stronger than our soldiers." Their destination was Camp McCoy in Wisconsin. The camp defied every expectation. Clean, orderly rows of wooden barracks, kitchens filled with the aroma of bread and soup, showers offering hot water on demand, a luxury unknown even in most Japanese cities. The guards were efficient, sometimes even polite. When one woman asked how long they could shower, the American matron replied, "Until you're clean, honey." The first days were a blur of medical examinations, uniform distribution and orientation. Doctors recorded weights and heights, their figures shocking to the Japanese women. Average American women were taller, heavier, with stronger teeth and bones. Margaret Collins, a Red Cross nurse assigned to assist, wrote in her diary, "They look at our charts as though we are tricking them. Some cried when told they were malnourished by our standards. One asked if we had confused kilograms with pounds. The disbelief is profound. It is as if their world has cracked open." Evenings found Yumiko, Kiko, and Hyoko whispering about the American guards, about the seemingly careless disposal of leftover food, about the endless supplies of soap and fabric. Every discarded cigarette butt, every casually repaired truck, every confident stride of the guards reinforced the same unsettling thought. Everything they had been taught was a lie. Yet disbelief wasn't the same as acceptance. Some prisoners clung to the belief that the guards were specially selected, that the abundance was staged, that the waste was deliberate propaganda. But in the quiet Wisconsin nights, as trains rumbled in the distance and the scent of pine drifted into the camp, a heavier question settled in each woman's heart. If their leaders lied about this, what else had they lied about? The story of their captivity had just begun. September 1945 found Camp McCoy settling into its routines. Reveille sounded at dawn, mess halls filled with the clatter of trays and the hum of English. By evening, the barracks grew quiet under the watchful gaze of tall floodlights. To outsiders, it was order. To the Japanese women, it was a waking dream, slowly eroding their certainties. Yumiko worked in the infirmary, assisting American medics. She wrapped wounds and treated infections with seemingly inexhaustible supplies, gauze, antiseptic, penicillin. Back home, she had learned to boil needles until dull and ration bandages like gold. Here, Margaret Collins opened fresh packages without hesitation, discarding half-used bottles of alcohol. Yumiko found herself whispering, "Wasteful, wasteful," as if the word could anchor her to the past. Kiko was assigned to kitchen duty, where she witnessed the scale of American abundance firsthand. The storeroom overflowed with flour, coffee and canned fruit. She watched cooks crack eggs into giant bowls, whisking dozens at a time, then casually discarding leftovers. At first, she assumed it was a performance, an illusion. But day after day, the waste was real. One evening, after disposing of an untouched loaf of bread, she broke down in tears, remembering her younger brother gnawing on sweet potato skins to quell his hunger. Hiyoko, observant and analytical, began meticulously documenting everything. The height of the guards, the daily rations, the number of trucks entering the compound. She measured and compared, desperately seeking a logical explanation. Her training demanded proof, yet every statistic pointed to the same conclusion. The America she had been taught to despise was impossibly strong. The first letters home were permitted in October. Prisoners were given paper, envelopes and censored pens. Most wrote cautiously, but truth still slipped through. Yumiko wrote to her sister, describing a place where hot water was endless, where bread was given freely, where guards smiled. "I cannot explain it," she wrote, "only that it is different than anything I knew." Some women refused to believe. Rumours spread that the abundance was temporary, a calculated deception. "They will reveal their cruelty soon enough," whispered a former nurse. But each day passed without cruelty. The most jarring contrast arrived with autumn, when American civilians from nearby towns began delivering supplies to the camp. They came not as enemies, but as ordinary workers. The Japanese women stared at them from behind the wire. These men, not soldiers, were taller, stronger, and healthier than the officers portrayed in Japanese propaganda films. Hiyoko wrote, "If even their common men are like this, then what of their armies? What of their factories? Perhaps our war was never winnable." The emotional toll deepened. Night after night, women lay awake, whispering fears. One admitted she no longer knew what to believe about her homeland. Another wept, fearing her children would think she'd been corrupted by enemy lies. Some grew angry, not at the Americans, but at the Japanese leaders who had perpetuated the illusion of superiority. In November, the prisoners witnessed a camp baseball game between American guards. The speed, power, and laughter of the players were a shock. Kiko, watching from the fence, clenched her fists. "They run as if war never touched them," she said. "And we are thin, broken shadows." By winter's first snowfall, the wall of propaganda had begun to crumble. The women were no longer asking if they had been lied to, but how much had been hidden, and why. For Yumiko, Kiko, and Hiyoko, the questions were no longer about America alone. They were about Japan itself. In those cold Wisconsin nights, a question grew heavier in each woman's heart. If their leaders betrayed them in war, what future could they trust when they returned home? December 1945. Snow blanketed Camp McCoy, transforming the barbed wire fences into delicate lines of frost, softening the harsh edges of the barracks. To the Japanese women, the whiteness felt like a cruel mirror, pure and endless, reflecting their muddied thoughts, heavy with betrayal and doubt. The holiday season approached, though few initially recognized it. The Americans decorated the camp with lights and wreaths. Barracks were warmed by constantly burning stoves. The constant heat was another stark reminder of the disparity. Firewood had been scarce in Japan since 1943. Here, it was fed into furnaces without hesitation, as if the forests were infinite. On Christmas morning, the women received gifts, small parcels containing soap, chocolate, cigarettes, and wool socks. To Yumiko, the package felt heavier than any metal. She turned the soap over and over, remembering weeks of washing in cold water with ashes and sand. Kiko stared at her chocolate ration with wide eyes, whispering, "I dreamed of this when I was a child. Now they hand it to me as if it were nothing." The breaking point came a week later during a re-education lecture given by an American officer. Through an interpreter, he casually discussed American wartime production. The United States had built over 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. The room fell silent. Then a woman gasped, covering her mouth as if she had betrayed something sacred. Hiyoko's hand trembled as she copied the numbers into her notebook. She calculated in the margins. Japan's best year had yielded barely 28,000 planes. The gap wasn't just wide, it was infinite. She dropped her pencil, whispering, "Then why did they send us to fight?" For days afterward, the women debated the lecture in hushed tones. Some insisted the numbers were lies, exaggerations meant to crush their spirits. But others, particularly those who had witnessed American abundance firsthand, accepted the grim truth. Yumiko recalled the daily arrival of cargo trucks overflowing with supplies. "If they can feed us like this, prisoners," she asked quietly, "what must they do for their soldiers?" The realization struck like a wave of grief. Belief in their nation's superiority had been their armor, shielding them through hunger, bombing, and loss. Now that armor cracked, leaving them exposed to the bitter cold of reality. The psychological collapse wasn't uniform. Some responded with denial, clinging to whispers that America's prosperity was hollow, its strength soulless. But others turned their anger inward, toward Tokyo, toward Tojo, toward the men who had sent them into an unwinnable war cloaked in lies. One evening during roll call, a nurse named Sachiko broke down. In front of the guards and her fellow prisoners, she shouted in Japanese, "They betrayed us! They knew, and they sent us anyway." The barracks fell silent. No one argued, no one comforted her. The truth had settled in their hearts. Sachiko had merely spoken it aloud. That night, Yumiko wrote, "We were told Americans are weak, yet I have seen their guards carry crates that would break 5 of our men. We were told America is starving, yet I eat here more in one day than in a week at home. We were told their society is decadent, broken, yet the children I glimpse beyond the fences run strong, tall and unafraid. Every lie revealed feels like another death." Kiko, once defiant and quick to suspicion, grew quieter with each passing day. She stopped dismissing the food as theatre, stopped whispering rumours of staged illusions. She began to study English phrases, her lips silently shaping foreign words as if they were keys to understanding the new world around her. In January 1946, another shock arrived. The camp organised a friendly exhibition. A local baseball team played against American guards. The women, curious, gathered at the fence. The game unfolded with speed and strength that defied their imaginations. Men hurled balls across impossible distances, sprinted with explosive energy, and laughed as if the war had been a mere storm now past. Hiyoko gripped the fence, the frozen metal burning her skin. She remembered the propaganda posters, cartoons of stooped, weak American soldiers. Yet here, before her eyes, ordinary men moved like athletes. She whispered a single word: lies. By February, despair deepened into something more complex: acceptance. The Japanese women hadn't just lost their war, they had lost the illusions that sustained them. Some began to wonder if defeat, in a twisted way, was liberation. The snow melted. The Wisconsin fields turned to mud. With the thaw came a quiet but irreversible shift. The prisoners no longer compared themselves to what they had been told. They compared themselves only to what they saw. And what they saw was a world larger, stronger, and more abundant than they ever believed possible. March 1946. The Wisconsin winter receded, leaving behind fields wet with thaw and skies swollen with restless clouds. Inside Camp McCoy, the rhythm of captivity continued. But within the barracks, something heavier than snow pressed down on the women. The weight of recognition. For months they had whispered questions in the dark. Now, the answer stood before them in daylight. Undeniable. Yumiko, once steady and composed, began to unravel. In the infirmary she stitched wounds and measured temperatures, but her thoughts wandered. One afternoon, while disposing of unused bandages, she stopped and stared at the clean white cloth. In Nagasaki, she had watched children die because there was nothing left to dress their burns. Here, such bandages were thrown away without a thought. She dropped the cloth and collapsed against the wall, tears streaking her cheeks. Margaret Collins rushed to her side, but Yumiko only shook her head, whispering, "Why? Why did they tell us we were winning?" Kiko's silence grew heavier. She had been defiant at first, quick to argue against the others' doubts. Now she sat alone after meals, practicing English words in the margins of old newspapers. When Yumiko asked her why, Kiko looked up with eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "Because if I learn their words," she said, "maybe I will finally understand how they became this." Hyoko's notebook grew thick with pages, numbers, sketches, fragments of overheard English, even maps drawn from memory. But instead of clarity, her studies brought despair. The gap between America's strength and Japan's weakness was too vast to measure. One night she tore out a page and read it aloud. In 1944, America built more ships than Japan had in its entire fleet. In 1 year, they produced more steel than we produced in the whole war, and we were told to fight until death as if our sacrifice could bend numbers written in iron. The barracks fell silent. Some women wept, others stared at the floor, faces pale with rage. The climax came with the arrival of news from home. In April, Red Cross officials brought reports of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, photographs of flattened cities, survivors with keloid scars, children living among ruins. Many prisoners had heard rumours, but the images cut deeper than words. Hyoko dropped her notebook, unable to hold the picture of her homeland's ashes. Yumiko, who had family in Nagasaki, sat frozen, staring at a blurred image of a city she once knew. Smoke curled from collapsed houses. The skeleton of the cathedral pierced the sky. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "My home is gone." For days afterward, the camp seemed muted. Guards spoke softly, meals passed in silence. Even the laughter of children from nearby towns felt distant, muffled. Yet amidst the grief, a new thought emerged. If everything they had been told was false, if their leaders had lied about America's weakness, about Japan's invincibility, about the war's purpose, then perhaps loyalty itself was a chain. One evening, Kiko stood at the barracks window, the sunset staining the snowmelt red. She turned to the others and said, "They took everything from us, our brothers, our homes, our pride. But here I see children running free, women treated with respect, food in every hand. If this is defeat, then what was our victory ever supposed to be?" Her words broke something open. Women who had remained silent began to speak, to rage, to confess their anger, not at the Americans, but at Tokyo, at the emperor's ministers, at the system that demanded blind obedience. That night, Hyoko wrote one final line in her notebook before closing it. "I was not defeated by America. I was defeated by the lies of my own country." For the first time since their capture, the women no longer saw themselves only as prisoners. They were witnesses, living evidence of a war built on illusions, and in that realization, painful and raw, lay the beginning of transformation. Summer 1946. The camp grass grew tall, a vibrant green against the wooden barracks where the Japanese women lived out the long months of their captivity. Life in Camp McCoy no longer felt like a temporary passage, but a strange second world, an island of order and abundance, standing in brutal contrast to the ashes of their homeland. The women had changed. Yumiko no longer cried when discarding supplies in the infirmary. Instead, she saved scraps of cloth, passing them quietly to others as mementos, tokens of survival. She had learned to speak with Margaret Collins in halting English, asking questions not just about medicine, but about American women, their freedoms, their choices. The answers unsettled her even more than the food rations. Kiko, once the sharp-tongued skeptic, now taught herself English with fierce determination, repeating words late into the night. To her, language was a weapon, not of war, but of survival. She filled notebooks with phrases, freedom of speech, equal rights, newspaper press, words she'd never heard in Japan. Hyoko no longer measured America only by numbers. Her notebook became a diary filled with reflections on morality and truth. She wrote, "Our defeat is not simply military, it is spiritual. We were children in a house of mirrors, shown only what our leaders wished us to see. Here, in the land of the enemy, I finally see my own face." In August, nearly a year after their capture, word came that many prisoners would soon be repatriated. The announcement stirred conflicting emotions, relief at the thought of home, dread at returning to a country ruined by fire and famine. Some women whispered of staying, of finding ways to build lives in America. Others longed desperately for family, even if what awaited them was rubble. On the night before departure, the three friends, Yumiko, Kiko, and Hyoko, sat together beneath the glow of the camp's floodlights. The air was warm, filled with the hum of insects. They spoke quietly, not of the past, but of the future. Yumiko said she feared being unable to reconcile the two worlds, the hungry Japan of her memories and the abundant America of her captivity. Kiko admitted she no longer knew what it meant to be loyal to a nation that had lied so thoroughly. Hyoko said nothing at first, then finally whispered, "Perhaps our duty now is not obedience, but truth. If we return with open eyes, maybe we can teach others what we have seen." The train that carried them east toward the Pacific was filled with a heavy silence. Each woman pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the American landscape unfold, vast fields, endless factories, bridges of steel. They knew they would never forget. When at last their ship departed for Japan, the women stood on deck, staring back at the receding shoreline. They had come as enemies, lived as captives, and left as something else entirely, witnesses to the collapse of illusion and the fragile strength of truth. The journey back was a physical and emotional one, a slow unwinding of the carefully constructed narrative they had lived under for so long. The ship, a vessel of repatriation, carried not only women but the weight of shattered illusions and the dawning recognition of a world far different from the one they had known. The endless expanse of the Pacific mirrored the vast chasm that had opened between their expectations and reality, a chasm that had begun to reshape their very understanding of truth and loyalty. The days blurred into a monotonous routine of sea and sky, the rhythmic sway of the ship a constant reminder of the journey both literal and metaphorical. The women found solace in shared silences, in the unspoken understanding that bound them together, a shared trauma, a collective revelation. Yumiko spent hours staring at the horizon, her mind wrestling with the stark contrast between the plentiful resources of America and the desperate scarcity of her homeland. The memory of overflowing American larders clashed with the haunting image of emaciated children scavenging for scraps. Kiko, ever practical, began to meticulously document the details of their journey, charting their progress on a makeshift map. Each degree of longitude crossed represented not just physical distance, but an increasing emotional distance from the rigid ideology that had shaped her life. She found herself questioning not only the assertions of her government, but the foundations of her upbringing. Hyoko, the quiet observer, found a renewed passion for her medical training. Observing her fellow passengers, she began to document their conditions, noting the signs of malnutrition and illness that were rampant amongst them. She knew the physical wounds of the war were far from healed, and she felt a growing responsibility to address the needs of those who had suffered. The whispers on the ship were now different. The once hushed tones of denial and conspiracy were replaced by open discussions about betrayal, about the chasm between the propaganda they had been fed and the stark reality they had witnessed. The ship became a floating forum, a space where the seeds of dissent, long suppressed, were finally allowed to grow. The shared experience of captivity had forged a profound bond between these women, a bond that transcended the confines of their physical proximity. They supported each other in their moments of doubt, offering comfort and strength as they navigated the turbulent waters of their emotional turmoil. The ship was more than a vessel of repatriation. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. As the shoreline of Japan emerged on the horizon, a mix of emotions washed over the women. Relief mingled with dread, anticipation with fear. The sight of their homeland was bittersweet, its beauty marred by the knowledge of the devastation that awaited them. The once unyielding belief in their nation's superiority had fractured, leaving them vulnerable to the full weight of their loss and the challenge of rebuilding shattered lives and a shattered nation. The women were not merely returning home, they were returning to a future uncertain, but no longer defined by the unquestioning obedience and blind faith that had characterized their past. They carried with them a newfound awareness of the world, a broader perspective forged in the crucible of captivity, and an enduring determination to seek out the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. The ship docked, the gangplank lowered, the transition from captivity to the uncertain reality of post-war Japan. As the women disembarked, their steps were measured, deliberate, each one representing the crossing of a threshold, not just from one place to another, but from one world view to another forever changed by their experience in the land of the enemy. The air was thick with the scent of home, a mixture of salt, wood smoke, and something else, something almost intangible, the scent of uncertainty. As they looked back at the receding ship, they were not simply Japanese women returning home. They were witnesses, carrying the weight of truth and the dawning understanding of their nation's betrayal, a weight that would accompany them into a future still unwritten, a future where the seeds of change had been sown. The train journey across Japan was a stark contrast to their journey across America. The rolling fields of wheat and endless orchards were replaced by scenes of devastation, shattered cities, skeletal remains of buildings, and the lingering smell of ash. The abundance they had witnessed in Wisconsin was a distant memory, replaced by the stark reality of widespread poverty and starvation. Yumiko, returning to Nagasaki, found her home reduced to rubble. The familiar streets were unrecognizable, replaced by a landscape of destruction and despair. The vibrant city she remembered was gone, replaced by a ghostly shell, a haunting reminder of the war's devastating power. The faces of the survivors were etched with hardship, their eyes mirroring the profound loss and suffering they had endured. Kiko, having lost her family in the bombing of Okinawa, found little comfort in returning home. The island, once her sanctuary, was now a graveyard of memories, a desolate reminder of the horrors of war. Her sharp intellect, once used to decipher enemy codes, was now turned inward as she grappled with the profound implications of the lies she had been told. Hyoko, returning to a family that had miraculously survived, felt a growing sense of responsibility. Her quiet observations during captivity, once only entries in her notebook, now felt like a heavy burden. The stark contrast between the American reality and the Japanese narrative fueled a desire to confront the lies and distortions that had led to such devastation. The women found themselves ostracized by some, viewed with suspicion by those who clung to the old narratives. Their experience in America was seen as a betrayal by some, a challenge to the deeply ingrained belief in Japan's superiority. The whispers of dissent, once confined to the barracks in Wisconsin, now faced the harsh realities of post-war Japan. Yet, amongst the skepticism and hostility, there were others who listened, who were open to the perspectives offered by these women. Those who had suffered the most were often the most willing to question the official narratives, to confront the uncomfortable truths that lay hidden beneath the veneer of national pride. The stories of the women, shared in hushed tones, began to slowly chip away at the facade of unquestioning loyalty and obedience. The seeds of change planted in the fertile ground of disillusionment began to sprout. Yumiko, using her skills as a nurse, quietly challenged the existing medical practices, introducing some of the techniques and knowledge she had acquired in America. Her actions, though seemingly small, had a ripple effect, slowly improving healthcare in a nation desperate for help. Kiko, using her newfound English language skills, began translating materials from America, sharing information about advancements in technology and medicine. Her efforts to bridge the gap between Japan and the outside world were met with both resistance and fascination, igniting curiosity amongst those eager to learn and rebuild. Hyoko, fueled by her profound understanding of the deception that had led to war, began a campaign of quiet resistance. She meticulously documented the disparities she saw, the gap between reality and the propaganda she had been taught, and shared this information with others. Her actions, carefully calculated, slowly began to foster an environment of critical thinking and reflection. The women's collective experiences in America, their personal transformations, gradually began to reshape the narrative of their nation. They became silent revolutionaries, quietly challenging the official stories, questioning the assumptions, and planting the seeds of a different Japan. A Japan where truth and reason would prevail over blind loyalty and unquestioning obedience. Their personal struggles, initially marked by disillusionment and betrayal, had become the foundation for a quiet but profound transformation. Years passed. The physical scars of war gradually faded, but the emotional wounds remained, a constant reminder of the devastating consequences of lies and deception. Yet the women persevered, their resilience a testament to the power of truth and their unwavering commitment to a better future. They never forgot the stark contrast between the abundance they had witnessed in America and the suffering they experienced in their homeland, a contrast that forever shaped their perspectives and their actions. Yumiko, Kiko, and Hyoko never forgot their time in Wisconsin. Camp McCoy, once a symbol of captivity, became a symbol of awakening, a place where they confronted the lies that had shaped their lives, a place where they discovered the strength of their own voices, and a place where they learned the importance of